Today I thought I'd get back into the more of the nuts and bolts of photography. Now this video is for Nikon shooters only, and I'm going to be talking about a setting inside the camera that I just found out today, having talked to Eric, that Canon doesn't have built into their cameras. So I'm going to have a little setup here where I have this DSLR set up on a tripod, and I'm going to shoot the video with this Canon M50, and I'm going to show you what I'm talking about, and then I'll come back on the other side. Okay, so here's the back of my camera, and most Nikons are set up this way, and they do it like this so that you have continuity from when you move from one body to the other. But the way I have it set up now, I'm in aperture priority, and right now this rear control wheel, which is on the top of the camera here, actually let me zoom out a little. Okay, so the rear control wheel, which is right here on the top side of the camera. Okay, it's not doing anything. If you look down here, here's my shutter speed, my aperture, and my ISO. Okay, so when I spin this wheel, nothing's happening. Now the front control wheel, when I move that one, it's actually changing the aperture. So it's an f2.8 lens, and as I close down the lens, the shutter speed gets slower. But the ISO is just sitting still, and nothing's changing there. So there's a setting built into these cameras that actually makes it so much easier to shoot. So now if I wanted to, I could press this button down with my left hand and rotate the wheel. And if I wanted to get my shutter speed up, I can increase my ISO, and you see the shutter speed getting up to where a point where I could actually shoot it handheld. Okay, but it's a two-hand operation on a Nikon camera, especially if you're holding a long lens, or you know, if the camera's a little too heavy for you to one hand. This is just, it's not an ideal situation. So if you go into the menu, and under the little pencil icon in the shooting and display menu, click on that, and you'll go down and you'll see Easy ISO. So you click on that and you turn it on. So now I have Easy ISO set. So now what happens is, if I was hand holding this, and you see I'm shooting at f2.8, but there's really no light in here, so I have a 1/8 of a shutter speed, which is very slow, and I wouldn't be able to hand hold this. Now when I spin the control wheel, I can quickly make adjustments. This is one of the reasons why shooting in aperture priority with the Easy ISO button set on is probably the best way to shoot, because you have some really great control over the camera with one hand. So with my front control wheel, I can control my aperture, and then I can control my ISO with my back control wheel. And this is how you really take control of your exposure. So that might be something that you've been using, or it might be something you had no idea was buried in your camera's menus. I hope it makes your life easier. So when I asked Eric about this, he told me that his new Canon R doesn't have a setting like that, and that his Canon 5D4 and 5D3 were also not set up like that. Now, to be fair, I think on the Canons, right on the top of the camera here, where I have my exposure compensation button, this is an ISO button. So quickly, with one hand, he can push down this button and roll the dial and make adjustments. So it's there, and it's not, you know, hard to find. But for some reason on Nikon, they decided to put it on the other side of the camera from where your hand is. So your hand's over here, and this is where the ISO button is. So you have to actually use two hands, unless you start reassigning buttons, and you can do that. But it's baked right into the camera, so if you, why not use the setting that's there? So just turn on that Easy ISO, and hopefully it'll make your life easier when you're shooting. Controlling your ISO is one of the ways where you can kind of take control of your camera without using manual mode. It's an easy way to make adjustments on the fly quickly if you want to keep your aperture set at a certain aperture, and you want to keep that shutter speed at a higher setting. When you're shooting in manual mode, sometimes the light changes, and like I'm sitting here doing this video, and I have a window on the other side here, and the sun keeps going in and out from behind the clouds. So if I was trying to take a picture in that situation, I might take a shot, and then the sun comes out, and all of a sudden my settings are all off because it just got super bright in the camera. So with a setting like that, I can either close down my aperture if I want, or I can dial down my ISO. Now if you're shooting at ISO 100, and you're outdoors, sometimes there's not much you can do. You have to either, set your shutter speed at 1/4000th of a second or really close down your aperture, but at least you have control of all of those settings quickly and easily in your hand there. Shooting in manual mode, you lose the control of that dial. When you're shooting in manual, that front wheel is going to control your shutter speed, the back wheel is going to control your aperture, and you're still going to need the other hand to get to the ISO button to make that adjustment if you need to. On some of the new mirrorless cameras now, there's an assignable ring on these lenses that are specifically built for the mirrorless cameras. And I know on Eric's Canon R, he actually has on some of his lenses a ring that can have the ISO assigned to it, which is great. So now, while you're holding your camera with this hand, you have your hand on the lens, you can make a quick adjustment to your ISO. And I think that's great. But I don't have that. And some of these new lenses made for the mirrorless cameras are very expensive. So if you're adapting older lenses, you're not going to have that functionality. So that's just something to think about. But it's nice when you have control over your ISO quickly without having to use another hand. So I hope this video helped you, and if you were using it already, then that's great, and you found it. Sometimes some of the things in the camera, you might have a camera for years and not even realize that there was this setting in there that was going to make your life a little bit easier. So hopefully this does that for you. I'm going to put our Understanding ISO video here, which will kind of give you the basics of what it is and what happens to your images when you start cranking it up. And then over here I'm going to put our photography playlist. So if you have other questions about photography, maybe more general questions, or you wanted to find out something specific, we might have a video in this playlist for you. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.